Since time immemorial, indigenous people have lived, traveled, and traded in the Puget Sound region. The Donation Land Act of 1850, to encourage westward expansion, allowed American settlers to claim these traditional native lands. The explosion of immigration into the region that followed forced the U.S. government into a fraught treaty-making process with local tribes. The original terms of the Medicine Creek Treaty were inadequate and ultimately unaccepted by tribal leaders, resulting in war. The Indigenous Voices podcast is an extension of the award-winning Puget Sound Treaty War Panel series and Fort Nisqually Living History Museum. The podcast advances tribal voices in the telling of Puget Sound history and shares tribal knowledge and expertise with wider audiences. Hello, my name is Warren KingGeorge. I'm an enrolled member of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe on my father's side, and on my mother's side, I descend from the Upper Skagit tribe.
Nettsie Bullchild, Nisqually Indian tribe, Director of Archives and Tribal Historic Preservation Office, tribal member, and tribal elder.
Haslachel, Togalapo, Deisha, Desiyaya Chulup, Brandon Reynon Titsta, Puyallup Chud, Duflalut Debati, Director/THPO. My name is Brandon Reynon. Welcome. I am the Director and THPO for the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. I'm also a Puyallup tribal member.
Haslachel, Takablu Sitsta, Puyallup Chud. Good day. My name is Takablu. I'm from the Puyallup tribe. My English name is Amber Taylor. I am the daughter of Eric Bennett and Carol Taylor, the granddaughter of Ramona Bennett, Clyde Bill, Patricia Taylor, and Al Taylor.
The American Religious Freedom Act of 1978 protects the rights of Native Americans to practice their traditional religions, guaranteeing access to sites, use and possession of sacred objects, and the freedom to worship through ceremonials and traditional rites. In Episode 9, participants discuss the path to gaining religious freedom and some of the difficulties they must still overcome to practice religion today.
1970s, it's kind of at a really interesting time for tribal nations, not just here, but in throughout the United States. You have AIM is up and coming. You have, them where they're starting to, we have rights as sovereign nations. And so the real sovereignty that we know today, it really starts getting, that's kind of where it really starts getting some traction, and we start getting we can start getting lawyers to help fight us in the battles and the courts, so this is where we start that transition into, hey, we're still here, and now we can fight. We've been fighting you for the past 150 years on the battlefield. Now we're going to start battling you in the court system. Now we have lawyers. Now we ourselves are lawyers, or now we have lawyers that are willing to stand up and, do some pro bono work like we had here at Puyallup. Now we're having voices where it's going to hurt you the most, and that's going to be in the laws, right? And so that's where AIM comes in. We start fighting for our rights. We start occupying Alcatraz. There's just overall the civil rights starts to come into play, where we start having a voice. And, it helps that the media is starting to become more getting into its own as well. So more and more visualization to the wrongs that have been occurring in Indian country are starting to be more visual. So people's, they've all they had as stories, or what they had in the newspapers, or now they can actually see it for themselves. They can, they see. They see what we had with the Fishing Wars Memorial Bridge area here, where we had the raid on the Puyallup camp. That's all now visualized. Now people are putting people to what's going on, instead of it just being what they've read or what they've heard or what they've been taught. They're seeing it for themselves, and that really helps our messages start being delivered and heard.
Like most documents that I've read, published material, oftentimes you've got to be able to read between the lines in the published material. Our elders, right up until today, are extremely crafty and are wicked smart when it comes to conveying messages and teaching some of our traditional values without even you knowing it until it actually happens and that you've done it. So I think that the Religious Freedom Act of was it 1978? I was 13 years old at the time, and there are religions that continue today that have not experienced interruption. It's continuous. It survived the early settlement days of the mid 1800s. It survived wars, World War I, World War II. It survived the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and so in which our tribal members were participated in. Right? So we honor those veterans today for those that stepped up, those strong hearts that were willing to step forward. These opportunities to reinforce the idea of natives being Atis Talbilch in our language, being Indian people. I guess what makes me think about that is that there were actually laws that prevented us. There were laws that were in support of the idea of not allowing Native people to practice their own traditional faith. It was illegal to gather in these so-called powwows or potlatches. You're not allowed to do that, is what we were told, or what our ancestors were told. So, but our ancestors were tenacious and they gathered anyway. They found a way. They used barns. They used houses. They used what my late uncle would term as secret society meetings, is what they were called. And only a handful of people, of tribal members, were invited. It was RSVP, as they say now. And so, and my late uncle, he shared stories of these gatherings that were held in secret from the law, from our non-native neighbors. In 1978 is not that long ago. It's really recent. It's only a couple of decades behind us, which is super scary, right? That's how much. You could use that as a gauge to identify how natives are misunderstood. So, and there's that old saying, right? Most people are afraid of what they don't understand. And I think that applies here in traditional Native American religion. Most people are afraid of it because they don't understand it.
I think you hit that right on the head. I mean, you think about why the potlatches, these gatherings there, a lot of them were religious, and these potlatches, these gatherings from, nations are all over. It scared them. It scared the non-native because they didn't understand what was going on. They just saw us, singing songs and giving our stuff away. And they, that scared them. Like, what are you doing? That it must be, I love one of the last articles written by one of the last potlatches for Tacoma. The writer in like 1914 writes, oh, the Indians are causing a ruckus and it's been going on all night. The citizens of Tacoma are frightened and they couldn't sleep last night. And it's just like they're thinking we're getting ready for a war party, I think is what the article says. And not realizing, man, we're just having a good time. We're over here celebrating. We're over here just enjoying being Native and coming together, having religious ceremonies, having friendly gaming competitions, that sort of thing. And it was outlawed right after that because like you said, Warren, they just didn't understand, and they didn't understand it, so therefore they were scared. And if it's scary, we're going to ban it because it's not our Christian way, and so we're going to have to make sure that those Indians can't do that anymore. And it wasn't until, nearly 100 years later where, hey, maybe they weren't over there coming a war party. They were just over there. And so they'll, now we can be allowed to practice our religion openly and as we used to.
Because it wasn't in the treaty, it never should have been banned. And that's the whole thing. It's like you said, if they didn't understand something immediately, it's like, oh, that's not good. We're going to get rid of it. And so by bringing the, what is it called? The Indian Religious Freedom Act, it's like, why are you bringing it back? It never should have been gone in the first place. So that's what happens to us. It's always like, oh, here, we're going to give you something. We're going to, here, this is for you, all you tribal people now. You can go ahead, and this one, it talks about using peyote, all these things that happened that it was like, we were already doing that. And like you said, a lot of it was done in secret, because we still practiced it. But it's like, why do we always need something? And they always act like, you're doing us a favor, you're giving us something back. And so, in the 70s, like 78 and all that, when you're talking about tribes, my thing from like the Bolt and all this other stuff is now, and on Nisqually, we had a reservation, but we had no houses. My grandma had a house built, no electricity, no running water. We grew up without houses. We knew what outhouse was. But that was the way life was. So there was, I think, 2 or 3 houses on the reservation, but everybody had to move off. So, you lost that relationship with all your relations that, your relatives around. But now you're trying to bring that back with all of these laws that they're creating, public law, all these things that they've said, okay, here, you can apply for this, you can get this money, you can do this. So, they go back. So we had houses, I think 4 built on the reservation. They were my aunt's. But, now you're putting back on the reservation if you had a reservation. I mean, I felt for Puyallup that, they almost didn't exist, so these reservations, because you didn't have it, you had to move off. Now you come back and now, you need housing, you need all this stuff. So now you have to set up your tribal governments in order to protect that so that you can provide for your tribe, your tribal people, which in the past you did in the first place. So you see how it all comes around, and then it's like, this is what we did in the first place, but now, the government is doing this favor for you. They're giving you money, they're allowing you to get houses on your reservation. They're allowing you to purchase land back for your reservation, for your people. So this is why I feel there's always this animosity, because it's always like we're giving you a handout, we're doing you a favor. And it's like, we already did this for our people. We took care of our people before you wiped it out. I always look at like some of these poor countries, they're like, oh, we're going to provide water. And I go, these people knew how to find water. They knew how to find food, but you took it away from them. And now, they're poor. And that's what happened to us. And sadly, a lot of these other, nationalities didn't see it coming, like, because it happened to us. And I feel we were the first ones that it happened to, and then it just went down the line. So, it's like we knew how to do things and how to take care of stuff, but now all of a sudden the government is, like I said, doing you a favor. So now tribes have to go back. And my mom was like that because she became chair, had no, did not, she quit in 9th grade because she says, I thought I knew everything, had no political knowledge, had no money to travel. Even my grandpa had to do, they had to all put money together just to get to Seattle, to go and bring something that they wanted and, something talked about. So in this sense, they give you self-governance, they give you all of these things, but now you have to figure out how to do it and how to take care. So now it's taking you 10 years because, like I said, my mother didn't know. She was just doing the best she could. A lot of them were doing that. Didn't go to college, didn't have a, college education, so you're going and asking, how do I do this? How do I get that? For your people, when in the past, if you would have left us alone, we had our leaders that did that. Our leaders made these decisions. They did all of this, that always took care of everybody. But like I said, it's frustrating for me because it's always like that. They're always thinking they're doing you a favor. So like I said, when people talk casino, oh, you guys are going to put up another casino. And I'm like, let me tell you what our casinos do. I said, they provide our medical facility. They provide houses for our people. They provide all of these things that we're not on welfare anymore. We don't have people on welfare. I said, but you don't look at it that way. You just think, oh, you guys get another casino, and that's what I'm saying, or you got a reservation. And it's like, wait a minute, before this reservation, so that's why I said things get turned around to where, for me, it's frustrating because I'm always like, we're always having to fight for something that was already ours, and our ancestors, we're doing things that that are passed down, that they've practiced for years, these things that they've practiced. So I remember my mom talking about that, her mother and some of, her uncles and her grandfather and stuff, these people, they had to go out and secretly practice these ceremonies, they had to secretly go talk their language, because they couldn't do it openly, so there's a lot of that happens, that when they say, oh, we did this for the tribes or we gave this back, it's like, we already had it. It's like you guys destroyed it and now we have to rebuild. And so that's what I think with the 70s, from what I remember, it was a rebuilding, but the leaders that were there, like a lot of them didn't, have the education, but they did the best they could and they knew what their people needed, so that's what they went after. And I just remember I remember my mom being gone a lot, because she really had to go and travel and do things to help, the tribe get what they needed. So I know that was happening at other tribes too. You always had to go back to DC or, somewhere else to go find money to help your people. So that's what I feel, that there was this rebuilding of what we already had and what they already knew. And now all of a sudden it was just, they were doing us favors. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think about just what you, Nettsie, and Warner both said too is, like we were always doing it, and that was so that becomes the reason for the act itself. It's like we had all these you know family or just natives across the country being arrested and put in jail for what? They're practicing a religion, and so now we're having these jails full of Indians and natives that are what's their crime, and so I think that becomes but it is one of those things, like Nettsie was saying, it's like, oh, now we're going to grant the freedom of your religion. Like, just the name itself is kind of hysterical, because it's like the religion was never captured, but yet you're freeing it. Oh, thank you, but now we can practice it and openly and not be arrested for it or not be prosecuted for doing it. So I guess there's that. But again, it is like the U.S. government like doing this. Oh, look at us! We're going to free we're going to free your religion, and it's like, we didn't need you to free it. We were already practicing it, but thanks for not arresting us now. So
It's pretty incredible to think about, you know, tribal tradition and belief systems and how we've been able to hold on to those things through genocide, through boarding school, through forced religion, through laws banning us from being able to practice those beliefs and those our belief in creator and It's pretty incredible to think that, 1978, those things still existed after the last 100+ years. There was actual administration trying to get rid of all of those beliefs. So, kind of circling back to, treaty times and boarding school and all of the destruction that happened to try to change our belief systems. And in 1978, yes, they're saying, yes, tribes can practice their religion. Interestingly, though, when I did and I did Google this, it's like, was there other religious freedom acts for non-native people? Right? Did that happen? And it looks like there wasn't a religious reorganization act until 1993. So we were ahead of the time, as many different laws and acts have shown. Like it must have worked really well. That's kind of a joke, but must have worked so well that in '93 they said, "Oh yeah, let's do it for everyone." Yeah, really, really interesting. You just have to think of like those roadmen and those knowledge keepers that shared, these teachings and kept them alive through all of these different ways of, dismantling our belief systems, and that's pretty powerful.
And that's the thing about it, with the Religious Freedom Act, the tribes, it wasn't necessarily religion. This is just my opinion. Don't judge me. But, they were ceremonial. We were so thankful, a thankful people. We were thankful for the salmon. You have the first salmon ceremony. Everything we did, we were giving thanks. And I think a lot of the non-Indians were like, well, who are you giving thanks to? And it's like, for whoever helps us, because that's what kept us alive. So that's the difference with that. The ceremonies were out of gratitude, out of thankfulness for what was provided, whether it was, the animals, the plants, I mean, we were thankful for the cedar tree. We were thankful for everything that it gave us and that provided. So to us, that was just a way, and it was also a way of passing it down to the next generation, to tell the next generation, you need to be thankful for what you have. You know, you thank those salmon, you thank all of these, and like I said, my husband's plains, he's Blackfeet, but they had all these ceremonies too, because of the buffalo and all of that. So, that's helping the next generation to be grateful for what you have. And that's why the ceremonies happened and they were passed down. So it wasn't just a belief as a religion, it was, something that made you thankful for what you had, so there was a difference there.
I like what Amber said a little bit ago, and it reminded me of the bigger picture in this event. What the government was attempting to do, it was part of that campaign to assimilate the natives. So preventing the natives from exercising who they are uh, was part of that part of that agenda to make the natives more European, to not speak their language, to punish them for talking their first language, and to prevent them from gathering ceremonially, prevent them from eating their traditional foods and gathering their traditional medicines, and prevent them from traveling to go and attend a potlatch or a naming ceremony that your nephew or your niece or your sibling is having a traditional ceremony. So all of these are parts of that agenda by our federal government to engage and to continue some of our tradition and cultures. That was the whole goal, was to erase the Indian and just make us, I guess, um, a darker skinned European.
I will say on the flip side, on the as compared to our last episode where we talk about the benefits of the Bolt decision, the benefits of this one is, this was also before my time. I was born a year later, in '79. But so my entire lifetime, I've known where we can do all these things. We can practice our religion openly. And I'm looking at the law here, and it says, and this is just, so I guess it's what I'm saying is it's grateful that when I read this, it's like, wait, this was a thing? Like, or for real? This is what was limited? So it says, let's see, the law was enacted to allow for tribes to practice, protect, to preserve their inherent right of freedom to believe, express, and exercise traditional rites, spiritual and cultural practices. These rights include, but are not limited to, access to sacred sites, freedom to worship through traditional ceremonies, rites, and the possession and use of objects traditionally considered sacred by their respective cultures. I was like, man, that's just crazy. And so it makes me just immediately respect my elders today who have been teaching me. We did a repatriation yesterday of one of our ancestors, and the teachings and the things that we were using, the ceremony that we were doing, that was banned 46 years ago. So it's just really interesting to think about how the effects of this freedom that we could bring home ancestors. We could treat them in a manner that was respectful to them and honor them, but that we can do it without the fear of being like yesterday. I guarantee nobody thought yesterday, like, oh, we should probably be watching our backs while we're doing this, right? The leader who was doing the ceremony, you never saw him like, we got to do this quickly, right? We took 6 hours yesterday to do this ceremony. And, so I mean, just the effects, think about that, like how it's a foreign concept today that we used to limit objects, that we couldn't even use objects that were considered culturally sacred, right? And then now we're able to, another end of it, through NAGPRA, now we're able to go after institutions like museums and universities and say, hey, that's ours, that's a religious practice. You have to give that back to us. You can't hold on to it for research purposes. So, I mean, it's just lots of good things that, at least in some parts have been beneficial for this law to happen.
But in that they have those sacred sites, and look at how much we have to fight for those sacred sites. We have to fight these parks and everybody else for these sacred sites that we're supposed to be able to use according to that act.
Brandon, I wanted to acknowledge you and your program for taking care of that in a good way. I really think that you folks did a wonderful job. I've heard some good reports, good words came back in full circle. So thank you for doing that, for doing the right thing. I appreciate that. Here's something I wanted to bring up earlier, and it had to do with ceremonies. We did a ceremony. We fed the ancestors, a spiritual feeding out in Seattle, and our program was drilled with all kinds of questions, very specific questions about how big is your fire going to be, how many people are going to be there, what are you going to burn, and finally I finally had to put my foot down, and I said, I have a right to do this, especially in this location, which was an ancestral burial ground. It was actually an actual cemetery. I said, we have a ceremony that's specific to these ancestors, and I have the right to be able to honor them in the way that I see fit. They're my ancestors, not yours. So I got to do my work, but I really had to have a heart-to-heart conversation with some administrators and professionals and a lot of neighbors who were not familiar with this religion and not familiar with some of our practices, and they were simply kind of afraid of it and didn't want anything to do with it, and didn't want to approve it because I don't know what they didn't know what I was doing. They didn't understand it. Eventually, I had to stand my ground because, like I said before, we're doing some work here that started thousands of years ago, and I'm not going about to jeopardize that work that was laid down thousands of years ago by our ancestors. So you people are not going to stop me from doing this. And they finally saw it my way, and we actually closed down Highway 520 for a full day so we could do our work, our spiritual work.
This is why we had when it was JBLM Fort Lewis, when they condemned that property, to take over. That was the big issue with that was, they did, different people that wrote about it talked about, um, the natives, Indians, tribal people really thought highly of their dead. They weren't leaving their dead. You know, that's what you talk about when this portable and this not. It's like this was why tribal people didn't want to be relocated. This is why we had the treaty war, was because they weren't putting them where they needed to be with their families. Their immediate, because they wanted to make sure where they grew up and where their grandparents, all of their relations were. That's where they wanted to be buried. But for somebody to say we're going to condemn it and you just move your dead, what does that say? That just always bothers me. And my grandpa was one of them that had him and my uncles had to move those, help move those bodies, and I can only imagine what they went through. So there's a lot of things that are never said, that tribes don't tell, that happen, that, somebody else wouldn't do that, but you can condemn this land, you can take it where these people lived, where they buried their, their relations, but you're going to tell them, they got a year to get off and you take whatever you have to take. And it's like, okay, we got to find land, to move our dead, you know, how do you, it's just, how do you even think about this, that being, that happening, but our people did it, because they're like, we're not leaving them, we're not going to leave them. So, they did, they had to move them. So there's just things that has happened when you think about this stuff, is like, this was why we were wanted to stay where we were, you know. Puyallup doesn't want to move to Nisqually or Muckleshoot doesn't, because that's where their relations, immediate relations are, and they want to take care of that, and to have somebody understand that, it's like, we don't just move and leave them, and we don't want to relocate because there's so much history there for, growing up and being around all our relations. But you find that in all tribal history. When all of these other tribes have gone to war, the first thing they do was sent away their chiefs. Their chief couldn't even die in their own homeland. They made them leave because they considered them hostile. But, that's the stuff that happened to separate. And so for Nisqually, that's something that was, I want to say traumatizing, but it got done. The people did it. They did do all the moving, but, just to think about that, like what Brandon was saying, to repatriate these remains, those people weren't Puyallup, but Puyallup, took them in, and, because that's what they do, and gave them a resting place, so that means a lot, and like so to have the ceremony and invite tribes to participate and witness, it was a good feeling that this was taken care of. And, but that's what we do, we take care of that, and we don't leave, I guess you'd say, don't leave anybody behind. But these are some of the things that happen, like when we talk about ceremony, it's just like, these are things that we just don't do, so having these ceremonies were important for whatever reason we had the ceremonies.
I think about how we as natives practice our religion versus the Judeo-Christian. Like Judeo-Christian, places are, it's sacred if there's a church there. It's sacred if there's four walls. Whereas there's sacredness in an area, and that area may be 10 feet, 3 feet, 300 acres. or in the case of Mount Tacoma, it's several thousand acres, right? It's not limited to walls like you see a lot of Judeo-Christian churches, right? I can only practice my religion if I go to church, if I go to a synagogue or a temple, right? That's where I can be. That's where I'm practicing. Or for us, with our native religion, it can be in a cemetery. It can be at a place for like the burning, like Warren was talking about, or it can be when you're out in nature. You can be connecting. If you're hunting, if you're fishing, if you're gathering. I had a religious type of experience doing picking huckleberries up in the mountains, And so, it's like, it can be anywhere. So when you're looking at, and I think that concept with the Christian mindset that these laws were created, or at least before, when they were with that Christian mindset of they can't be anything but this, so we must ban it, we must outlaw it. That, as we said before, that it scared them. They didn't understand it, so they had to outlaw it. Then as they became more and more educated about things, realized how ridiculous some of these laws and these bannings that they did. And so if you look at that again, if it's not within a wall, it can't be a church. But in our native ways, we don't need to have four walls to have it be a sacred place.
There was actually a class I took at the Green River Community College here. Anyway, in the class, the anthropologist, he talked about, he remembers, he was old enough to remember that in the 40s and 50s, that it was very common for non-natives to go to, like, say, the banks of the Columbia River or to old burial sites and gather bones and gather the burial artifacts, or just find an arrowhead and take it home. Farmers would have shoe boxes full of stone materials, stone tools, and just like it was nothing, just like it was a hobby, right? And he's now the professor even said that most people would just pack a lunch and make a day trip of it and go with their families, their kids mostly, and go and gather these things and then bring them home. It was just something to pass the time.
Yeah, it's just like going to dig up, somebody's mother, grandmother, grandfather, great grandfather, so that I can use them as my Halloween decoration. I mean, we had that come through our office where somebody had a tribal person's skull that they used for Halloween every year. They put it out on their mantle. I mean, those are our people. And there's actually, my great grandmother was cremated because of this, because of things like this, because there was no protection for, how do we know if, 40, 50 years from now, somebody's not going to be pulling us out of the ground, and we don't necessarily want that. So yeah, it's very disturbing. But like I said, if it was their grandmother, their mother, it would be all offensive. But because it's Indigenous people, it's research, or it's, cool, or it's a talking point when they have visitors over for a holiday, or it's just very bizarre. It's very bizarre and disrespectful. And it actually stems back to the Smithsonian, who also did that in our local region. We had Grave Island, which is Tanglewood Island, is what it's known as now, where they removed all of the human remains that were there. And what happened to them? What happened to those ancestors that the Smithsonian decided to bring for research? They probably scattered them all across the nation so other researchers could share in the science.
When you have these, there's families that have big collections and of Native American artifacts, and they keep them under lock and key. And then it's like, you ask them, like, well, how come you're not giving them back to the tribe? We have a connection. There are our history. Well, with these, my great grandfather, he lived on this land, and he found them, and so they're family heirlooms. Like, how are they your family? I just don't get it. Like, how are they your family heirlooms? Like, what connection do you have other than it's on land that your grandfather probably stole or murdered to get, and now you're keeping that, and so it baffles me when I come across those, and it came across this last week. The person put out an invitation for the tribes to come see your stuff. I'm like, but we can only see some because they don't want you to see everything, because it's our family history. It's your family history. It's my tribal stuff. It's my ancestors. It just baffles me that in their head they're justified because their great grandfather found it, therefore it's theirs now.
You also have to tie in the beliefs of the things that we, bring into our lives and that we have around us, and what that projects throughout our lives. The things that, we try to do good in our lives. And it's just my personal belief is, when we bring something home, that it's just not what you want to bring home. It's really not, because you don't know how that's going to affect you and your family, and who knows, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, and that's why I even cautioned this guy, was like, listen, there may be stuff attached to that you don't understand that can hurt you. It can hurt even me. It can hurt our own people, if it's not treated right. You should let us, who know how to take care of it, take care of that for you. So it'll just take continued education. I mean, just like we're talking about with the Religious Freedom Act, it took 100 years to educate. Hopefully it doesn't take, hopefully it's not my great grandkids that are finally going to get that stuff back. Hopefully it comes back sooner, but just got to keep educating. Hey Shaba, Hisquo, for joining us for the Indigenous Voices podcast. Indigenous Voices is available wherever you get your podcast. Follow and subscribe at fortnisqually.org.
This podcast is generously supported by the Pierce County Historic Preservation Grant,
as well as representatives from Puyallup, Nisqually, Squaxin, and Bullchild.
Music by Vincent Johnson, Nooksack, Lummi, and Nishani Johnson, Jamestown, Sklallam, Lummi.